Here, I've been coming to Peters Pond every summer since I was a baby. That's actually a picture of me with my mother up there and a picture of Peters Pond. The same is true for my husband, Jeff. And of course, Peters Pond is where we met. So many memories, so many of the best memories of my life have happened over summers spent on Peters Pond. It has been a special gem and one that gives my heart peace and joy. One day, about 3 years ago, someone asked me if my pond had cyanobacteria. This question planted a worry in my head. I thought, what is cyanobacteria? Does that mean that my pond is sick? If so, then I'm going to need to find out why and if there's anything that I can do about it. This was the catalyst for starting the Friends of Peters Pond Group. I know many of you here have similar feelings about Peters Pond or your pond, with your own special memories that you cherish and a desire to protect it. So what is going on with our ponds? Last year, Peters Pond had 2 cyanobacteria blooms in July, and many other ponds had blooms last year as well. Here's a bloom that is shown that was taken on Mashpee Wakeby Lake just in June, which is very early for a bloom. And this photo has not been edited. This photo, that is the real color of the water. If we do care about our ponds, we need to learn why this is happening and take action steps to correct the problem. So what are some of the action steps? How can we help to save our ponds? All of you received an agenda with a handout. And there's, on the second page, there is 5 ways to save your pond. And I'm not going to read through all of them, but I'm just going to read the top highlights, and you guys can read them more thoroughly later when you're at home. Okay, the number one thing is stop using fertilizers and pesticides. Plant buffer zones on hillsides to absorb stormwater. Make sure that you pump out your septic system. You also want to maintain any kind of storm drains and runoff. And finally, learn more about eco-sanitation. But we also have more strength to influence and save our sandwich ponds if we are in groups. Let's take a look at what the Friends of Peters Pond Group has done over the last year. Okay, so this is a slide that is on the right-hand side, is showing some of the existing ponds that were sampled for cyanobacteria last year. As a group, we requested the town of Sandwich to add more ponds to be sampled. The Association to Preserve Cape Cod, the town of Sandwich, and the Friends of Peters Pond worked together, resulting in Sham and Wakeby Pond being added to the list for cyanobacteria testing in 2024. For this summer, our Friends of Peters Pond volunteers will continue to collect samples for APCC and also SekiDisc water clarity readings for the Cape Cod Commission's remote sensing and water clarity program. And what you can see in the picture up there on the right is actually a SekiDisc. And what they, actually Joe and Nancy, the ones that are at our lovely food table, are our volunteers for this. And they lower this black and white disc into the water until you can't see it any longer, and it tells you the water clarity. And you measure how deep the disc goes. And we'll be looking for, if anyone lives on Peters Pond that has a boat that wants to volunteer for this year, we're looking for volunteers this year. Oh, the video's working. I didn't think it was going to work. Here we go. So you can watch how this disc goes down. And so what they'll do is they're using a tape measure so that they can actually measure the depth of the disc when it becomes just out of their sight. Okay, the Oakcrest Cove Boat Ramp Stormwater Project on Peters Pond. This project will prevent thousands of gallons of stormwater from entering Peters Pond from this particular ramp. Collaboration between APCC, the Horsley Witten Engineering Group, the Town of Sandwich, and Friends of Peters Pond has kept this project moving forward. With more grants and funding on the horizon, construction for this new stormwater design should start in 2025. Did you know that Sandwich has 12 great ponds? Looking ahead, we need more pond groups in Sandwich to advocate for pond health. A collection of these ponds called the Friends of Sandwich Ponds could be a force for change that can protect our waters. Does your particular pond have a pond group? If not, why not think about starting your own pond group? Start by talking with your neighbors, asking them their connection to their pond, and start an email list for future communication. Marlis Peichel and Susan Perry are a great example of this. They are two women who have successfully rallied their neighbors to help fund cyanobacteria testing on their beloved Pimlico Pond here in Sandwich. And Marlis and Sue are also at the back at the 50-50 raffle table. Thank you. I hope you are feeling inspired to help. On the last page of your handout, there are some helpful links. There's a wonderful guide on pond stewardship for anyone thinking about starting a group. You don't need to be an expert. APCC is there to help. I'm here to help. Anyone is welcome to come to one of our Friends of Peters Pond monthly meetings. And if you want to, just reach out to me by email, by phone for any other information. There are many other factors that are negatively impacting our Cape ponds and waters. Did you know that 75% of the problem is actually coming from our human waste? Next up, I have Mr. Bryan Horsley. Bryan is the project assistant at the Massachusetts Alternative Septic System Test Center, also known as MASSTC, located on Joint Base Cape Cod here in Sandwich. Here to help us understand why our ponds are degrading and the wastewater solutions we have available to us is Mr. Bryan Horsley. And I want to just thank him so much for being here because he's terrific. Thank you, guys.
All right, thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me. That was pretty cool to see myself in that video earlier. I hadn't seen that for a long time. That was my previous job working for APCC and actually doing that cyanobacteria sampling. So it's kind of cool. Now I'm full circle, and so now I'm wearing a new hat. I'm working with the Barnstable County Department of Health and the Environment. The Massachusetts Alternative Septic System Test Center is a division within the county government. We call it MASSTC for short because it's a big mouthful otherwise. But it's kind of neat to transition from sort of sampling the ponds and looking at the ponds and identifying the problems to where I'm now working, where we're sort of working on the solutions. So that's answering your question in the back. What can we do? Unfortunately, we can't just vacuum the cyanobacteria blooms up or just add something to the pond to kill it off. Really what we need is source prevention. So we really need to control the nutrients that are going into the ponds so that those blooms don't keep happening. So I'll just dive right in here. So I'm here to talk about wastewater. I'm from again, the MASSTC, the Septic System Test Center. So most of what we do at the test center is work with wastewater and try to come up with solutions for managing it better. So the first question always is, what actually is wastewater? So right across the bottom, those are your sources of wastewater. So in any house, in any building or business, we have a variety of receptacles from sinks to dishwashers to toilets and showers and laundry. That basically any one of those, when we're using them, we're producing wastewater. So anytime you use water in your house, effectively you're polluting water in the house. And I think most people don't really make that connection. But to me, water usage is water pollution. I think Chris mentioned that about she said 75, 80%, somewhere in that ballpark of the nutrient pollution entering the natural waters on the Cape, so the ponds and embayments, comes from wastewater. So this is what we're talking about now is sort of the biggest problem facing our waterways. And interestingly, the main source of those nutrients in the wastewater are actually urine or pee. And so we'll be talking a bit more about that as I go through here. In addition to the nutrients, the wastewater contains a whole variety of other contaminants, things like bacteria, chemicals from cleaning products, or things that leach out of our clothes and our laundry, pharmaceuticals. We take medications for different reasons, but actually the majority of that medication leaves our body and enters our wastewater. Microplastics coming off of clothing, again, is a big source of pollution to our waterways. So, you know, what we put down our drains really matters. And I think it's really important to have that perspective. So when next time you're at your sink or your toilet, you know, think about it. That's what I do. So once we, you know, use that water in the household, it all flows into our septic system, or sewer, depending on what our houses are connected with. And this diagram kind of shows, you know, how, you know, basically everything in the house is collected to a single pipe, which goes into a septic tank, and then eventually makes its way out into a leaching field or a soil absorption system. And all of that, you know, water and all of the contaminants that are carried with it eventually leach their way into the ground and into the groundwater. And I have a couple more slides to kind of show that in different ways. But, you know, speaking basically here is, you know, septic systems transfer the wastewater into the underground environment. Sewers actually do the same thing, except they, you know, first bring all the water to a central treatment plant where they, you know, treat it to remove nutrients and pull out some solids, but eventually they inject it back into the ground. So it's kind of the same pathway, just a little bit more moving it around in the case of a sewer. Luckily, filtering wastewater through sand actually does a really good job of killing off bacteria and viruses. And that's something we do a lot of work with at the test center, you know, figuring out exactly how much sand you need to kill off all the viruses. Viruses are kind of the most persistent pathogens we deal with in wastewater. So they're a good, you know, indicator that we're using enough sand to filter through to kill off, you know, those harmful pathogens. So that's a really important thing. Unfortunately, though, sand does not filter out nutrients, and that's why we have the problems that we have. Because those nutrients, and again, I'll get into it a little bit more here, you know, eventually make their way to the groundwater and then into surface waters. So on Cape Cod, this is especially a big problem because, as you all know, we basically live on a big beach here, and the whole, you know, everything underneath us is sand. So it really allows water to just flow right on through. And then once the wastewater hits the groundwater, you can actually see the blue arrows kind of heading off to the right of the screen there. That shows that groundwater moves. So it's not just this stagnant lake underneath all of us. It's always moving. And the average on Cape Cod is about 1 foot per day. So it's very, very slow. And which is actually one thing that's kind of terrifying to me is that, you know, if we're using septic systems today and they're, you know, say hundreds of feet or even miles away from ponds, those nutrients that we put in the groundwater at this point are going to be traveling for a long, long time. So even if we stop the sources at our households now, we're going to have, you know, nutrients being contributed to the ponds potentially for years afterwards. There's just a little more discussion on, you know, sort of the groundwater aquifer that's transmitting these nutrients, sort of two different angles. So I'll start with the map on the right shows an aerial view of Cape Cod, and it looks like a topographic map, right? If you're in, like, if you do some hiking in the mountains, it looks like, you know, mountains. But actually what you're looking at is sort of the underground topography of the groundwater table. So if you know, I can't really walk. Yeah, I can walk. So we're kind of in this area here right now. So what that tells me is we're basically on top of this mountain of groundwater. So, you know, most of what is being contributed to this area, actually I used a urinal earlier. I'm shameful to say I used a water flush urinal earlier in this building, and I was wondering, where's this wastewater going to go? It's probably being disposed right on top of that mound of groundwater, and then eventually it's going to flow sort of downhill. Down gradient. And so if you can imagine that as a hill, that's how groundwater moves. This is sort of a cutaway view of the upper arm of Cape Cod, showing that underneath us, there's this big aquifer of groundwater again. And I think kind of the interesting thing to point out here is that this is a lake right here. And so I like to call lakes and ponds windows to the aquifer. That's kind of a neat way to think of lakes and ponds. So, you know, people say lakes and ponds are spring fed. It's not really true on Cape Cod. Basically, lakes are just depressions that dig down into the groundwater table. Just to give you a sense of groundwater and you know how that relates to wastewater. I apologize, this is a terrible map, but it's the only map I could find that showed the watershed area for Peters Pond. I could have spent a lot more time and figured it out in GIS, but this is one that I found from the Cape Cod Commission's website. And basically what this shows is Peters Pond is the little blue blob there. And then the red, the shaky red outline that I put on there shows the watershed area. So what this means is that anything, you know, any wastewater, any liquid contaminants that are entering, hit that person. Missed it, okay. Basically, any contaminants that are landing on the ground or going into septic systems within that red area are going to make their way into Peters Pond eventually. So that's why I drew those yellow arrows. So basically, anything happening in the watershed will eventually make its way into the pond. So I think that's an important concept to understand, including this building is in there. So, the problem we're here to talk about is, wastewater making its way to groundwater and then ultimately causing this water quality degradation. And I can probably speed through these a little bit since we had that intro video there. But basically the nutrients in wastewater, nitrogen and phosphorus, are, making their way into our surface waters, our ponds and our embayments, and they're basically fertilizing the ponds. So, algae and cyanobacteria are nutrient-loving creatures, and just like the plants in your garden that you want to give some fertilizer to make them grow, these have the same benefit of getting excess nutrients. So by adding these nutrients, unintentionally in the case of wastewater, we are essentially fueling these harmful algal blooms and cyanobacteria blooms. Algal blooms are typically what we see in marine waters, so saltwater estuaries, and those are typically fueled by nitrogen. So that's the picture on the left is Cape Cod Bay near where I live, and the whole shoreline there is normally sand. That's just all piled up with algae or seaweed, and that is evidence of too much nitrogen entering that waterway. The picture on the right is Santuit Pond in Mashpee, and that's actually in the video earlier when I was doing sampling there. That's where I was at Santuit Pond. I would say that's one of sort of the poster children ponds on the Cape for cyanobacteria blooms, unfortunately. And yeah, it looks like it's just painted green. And that is usually caused by excess phosphorus. So phosphorus is considered to be sort of the limiting nutrient in fresh waters, or the nutrient that the cyanobacteria most need to cause a bloom. I also like to point out that cyanobacteria blooms and algae blooms are not only fueled by nutrients, they're also fueled by temperature. So thinking about sort of the whole picture of wastewater, it takes energy to treat wastewater, both in a central treatment plant or in a septic system at someone's house. And so, keeping in mind that, sort of the more energy we use, the more, emissions we create, the more climate warming we potentially fuel, the more of these problems we're going to see. So it's sort of this positive feedback loop of, like more nutrient problems, more energy to clean up the nutrient problems, and then more cyanobacteria blooms. Complicated and scary issue. This is just a cut of different headlines we've seen in the news. I was looking at this slide earlier and thinking about what I was going to say, and I was realizing that Cape Cod used to be sort of sold as this beautiful, impeccable environmental place where everybody wants to come and visit and play on the water, and now this is what we're known for. People all over the country know us for our polluted waters, and I grew up here on the Cape, and that's very, very sad to me. So that's why I do what I do, and why I always say yes when someone asks me to come out and talk about this stuff. So I think it's really important, really close to my heart, and I'm hopeful that collectively we can figure out ways to solve these problems. Let's see. So this is a horrible cyanobacteria bloom in the town of Harwich, my hometown. This is West Reservoir. I would say this is one of the worst cyanobacteria blooms I've ever seen. It was just disgusting, and this triggered the town to put up this advisory sign warning of basically danger to people and pets. That as Chris mentioned, these blooms can form toxins and can make people sick, and animals as well. These are some other photos I took in the marine environment. This is a gannet, which if you know your birds at all, this is a seabird that flies around really high and then dives like a missile down into the water. And I don't know exactly what happened to this particular bird, but looking at the amount of algae in the water and thinking about the poor water clarity and being a diving bird diving from hundreds of feet up, that could be part of the problem. So water clarity issues affect not only humans and pets but also wildlife. So what do we do about this? That was the doom and gloom section. So now we're on to the more positive approach here. So what can we do to manage these problems? Basically, there's two sort of main categories of managing wastewater pollution on the Cape. One is centralized or sewering. So I kind of described that earlier. That's basically like take all the water from all the buildings and pipe them to a central treatment plant where they can do all sorts of stuff and remove the nutrients and then dispose of cleaner water to the environment. And the second one is what we call decentralized or on-site treatment. And that's what most of the houses on the Cape have and most of the buildings on the Cape have. Those are what we call our septic systems. So sort of our backyard treatment plants. The map to the right shows in black the areas that have centralized sewers, and all the rest is basically using on-site septic systems. So about 85% of the Cape is reliant on on-site septic systems and only about 15% on sewer. Right now, towns are all sort of scrambling to solve these problems. So many towns are expanding their sewer areas. Many other towns are, basically towns are doing both. They're expanding their sewer areas and they're also trying to figure out places to put in more high performance on-site treatment systems, which I'm going to get into in a moment. So this is really what we do at the test center, at the Alternative Septic System Test Center. We are basically providing a research and testing ground for innovative alternative or IA on-site septic systems. So these are septic systems that are designed to remove the harmful nutrients that are going into the environment. So this is showing sort of two types left and right up here. The one on the left is a proprietary system. They're a company called Clean2 out of Martha's Vineyard. And they have developed this system called the Nitro, which is basically a two-step process for removing nitrogen from wastewater. The one on the right is what we call a wood chip bioreactor. This is a non-proprietary system, so meaning nobody owns this. This is something we sort of developed at the test center based on previous research. And this, again, basically does the same exact process as the Nitro system, but uses basically just sand and wood chips in order to provide the right environment for the right microbes to remove nitrogen. And so I should point out, these are both nitrogen removing septic systems. So not really what you need for your ponds, but very important for our estuaries because nitrogen is causing the problems there. What you're here to hear about is pond health. So these phosphorus removing IA septic systems are the ones that will, remove the phosphorus from the wastewater and hopefully, clean up the wastewater before it's making its way into the freshwater ponds. So there's basically two different types of systems shown here. On the left, you can see this, which is basically a rusty iron plate. This is an iron electrode. So this is a system that can be lowered into an existing septic tank, and it's plugged into a power supply. And what that does is facilitate iron ions breaking off into the water, and those iron ions bind with the phosphorus. So it creates like a phosphorus mineral that settles out in the bottom of the septic tank. This system on the bottom here basically does the same thing. It's just by a different manufacturer. But these seem to work very well. We don't have too many different test sites across the Cape, but it's something that I think has potential for removing phosphorus from wastewater. So if you live on a pond and you're interested, feel free to talk to me more about that. And then the one on the far right over there is a completely different sort of means of removing phosphorus from wastewater. This is a shallow drip, basically a drip irrigation system. But the key to that for removing phosphorus is installing it very shallow in the soil profile. A typical septic system leach field is installed fairly deep underground, like multiple feet under the ground surface. So all that wastewater is contacting is sand, and there's not a lot of microbial action or mineral diversity in that area. So you don't really get any phosphorus removal in plain old sand. But if you install these drip irrigation lines very shallow in the soil profile, like close to the surface, where you have more of a sort of diverse soil, you have the soil looks more brown than sort of white. You're accessing microbes and you're accessing minerals like calcium and magnesium that bind the phosphorus in the same way that the iron plates bind the phosphorus. So it's sort of more like kind of like an active removal in your septic tank versus a more passive sort of nature-based solution. They can both work really well for pulling phosphorus out of the wastewater. None of these systems are really widely required right now in pond watersheds, but I have seen some towns, when there's new construction proposed around a pond that's impaired from cyanobacteria blooms, the boards of health can actually require people to put these type of systems in. So all the treatment systems I've talked about so far fall into the category of what I call linear nutrient management. And so that's basically this image on the left here that starts with fertilize and ends with pollute. And so you know, in the world we live in right now, you know, we need food to eat, right? So we produce fertilizers, we grow food to eat, we eat that food, we use the bathroom, we basically put that food into water, or the nutrients in that food into water, and then we flush it away into the environment. And that's what sewers and that's what septic systems are designed to do. They're designed to get rid of our waste. But there's another way of thinking about things that falls into this category of what we call circular sanitation. And that's the circle on the right. So this is sort of, you know, thinking outside of the box here, thinking a little bit differently. But what if we didn't, you know, produce fertilizers and then throw them away? What if we produced fertilizers and then, you know, recycled them rather than throwing them away? So this is sort of a lead into the next part of my presentation here, talking about how we might be able to sort of change our whole relationship with nutrients for the better of the environment. So that leads us into this field of ecological sanitation or circular sanitation. And again, you know, thinking in a way that, you know, we're not just disposing of everything, but we're recycling any sort of valuable nutrients. So the first bullet point here is the quote that sort of motivates me every single day by R. Buckminster Fuller. It says, "Pollution is nothing but the resources we're not harvesting. We allow them to disperse because we've been ignorant of their value." And so I think that's totally true, especially in the case of nutrient pollution, because nitrogen and phosphorus are the #1 plant nutrients that farmers use to grow food. And so, you know, if you look at this globally, we use a huge amount of energy on the planet to produce fertilizers, both through mining phosphorus and synthetically producing nitrogen. And then we spend a huge amount of energy and money to throw that away through wastewater, you know, conventional wastewater treatment processes. So if we think a little bit differently about that, you know, there might be a much more efficient, much more globally sustainable way to manage nutrients. And that's, you know, what I'm proposing is looking at that circular sanitation strategy. The way that we do that is using eco-toilets, or one of the ways we can do that is by using eco-toilets. So the whole row of toilets and a urinal on the end are waterless toilets that allow for the diversion of urine and the composting of feces. And so through, you know, the combination of composting and urine diverting toilets, that allows us the opportunity to save tons of water and to recycle the nutrients in our waste. And I know this is shocking to some people to talk about these topics, but given, you know, the condition of our water quality, I think, you know, these are worth a look. And this is something we're very interested in at the test center. So yeah, the combination of composting and urine diverting toilet systems can, you know, allow us the opportunity to keep the nutrients out of the water where they're causing harm and keep them on the land surface where they can be beneficial. Let's see, so I'll step up there. So I just wanted to do sort of an overview of sort of the 3 different nutrient management strategies that I pointed out here. We have the, you know, the centralized sewer, we have the on-site IA septic systems, innovative alternative septic systems. Now we have the on-site eco-sanitation systems. And so I've never actually done this slide before. This is a new one for this event. So see how it goes. But just try to lay out like some, you know, some sort of points of each one. So centralized sewers cost about $100,000 per parcel. The people who are being connected don't technically see that because it's very heavily subsidized. But the overall cost of connecting one parcel to sewer is about $100,000. Sewers are the highest energy usage because if you think about it, you're taking all the wastewater from the town, you're, you know, pumping it to a central treatment plant. There's a ton of energy in that treatment plant to aerate and treat that water, and then you have to pump it somewhere else to dispose of it. So it's a very energy intensive process. I think for that reason alone, you know, sewers make the most sense in really dense areas, you know, like cities, you know, kind of need sewers. You know, there's not even enough land area to really use the other methods. Positive things about sewers is it allows management all at one location. So, you know, the town can kind of manage that. They can test the water and make sure it's being treated to the appropriate level. And it's convenient, you know, for a town to sort of be able to bring it all to one place and manage it all in one place. These can be really high performance when functioning properly. They're based on microbes. So, you know, if there's a whole bunch of toxins come in, it can actually kill the microbes and the plant won't work as well. But in general, these you know, treat wastewater to the highest level available. Some issues with centralized sewers are sludge management, which I don't want to go too much in depth in, but basically there's you know, they treat the water, but there's solids left over, and disposing of those solids is becoming more and more challenging. I'll stop with that. Groundwater recharge is a concern. And what I mean by that is that, when rainwater falls on the land, that's what recharges our groundwater aquifer. But if we're, pumping up our water, using it in our homes, it's entering our wastewater, and then we're pumping it far, far away to a wastewater treatment plant, we're basically starving the area where our home was of water recharge. So, we're putting a whole bunch of water in one place and not having enough water sort of dispersed around. So that's a problem. And then, as we connect more and more homes to sewers, we're running out of places to dispose of it. And so there's at least 2 towns on the Cape now that are looking at ocean outfalls. So I think that's a triggering word for just about everybody. So that's sort of a quick overview of sewering. On-site septic systems generally cost about $50,000 per parcel. So still not cheap, but considerably less than sewers. They have low to moderate energy usage. I think I showed a couple of different types. Some use more energy to run pumps and things. Others are much more passive, like soil-based treatment systems. So there's kind of a wide range in energy usage. Let's see, the best performing new technologies for on-site septic systems are still in development. So, these are relatively new technologies. And so the regulators require pretty stringent monitoring, like basically monthly sampling for most of these systems to make sure that they're working properly. So that can be a little bit of a headache for the homeowners using them. And all of these IA septic systems require individual operation and maintenance contracts. So, you need to make sure you can't just put the system in the ground and then walk away and forget about it. You need to have, a professional looking at it on a regular basis, just like a sewer has, except the town does that. So the IA on-site septic systems kind of pass, the buck to the homeowner to make sure the systems are working properly. And then lastly, the third option that I showed for wastewater management is the on-site ecological sanitation systems. Those are the least expensive. I said about $10,000 per parcel. That can range pretty drastically depending on the number of bathrooms you have and what type of system you're using. But I think that's a good kind of average number. They can use no or very little energy usage. They offer water conservation and nutrient recycling benefits. Like I mentioned, that circular sanitation method can come into play. Really, the downside of ecological sanitation systems right now is the regulatory approvals are not there. These systems have not been widely adopted. I was on the phone with the Department of Environmental Protection this morning, and they're still trying to figure out what to do with these ideas. So, while people are actively using composting toilets and urine diverting toilets on the Cape and throughout the world, there's still work to be done to get it sort of generally approved so that it's more doable for everybody. And I just wanted to point out that if you're interested in these, sort of maybe new concepts to some people of ecological sanitation or circular sanitation systems, we are in the process of designing and installing some systems at the test center. We offer tours pretty regularly. So if anyone's interested, again, grab my contact info. And within the next year or so, you'll be able to tour 3 different buildings that are outfitted completely with all different options, including waterless urinals, including composting toilets, both vacuum flushed and gravity flushed, and urine diverting toilets. There's also a urine diverting toilet in the back corner of the room here, which I'm sure Kim's going to point out when he gets up here. So you can look at it there as well. So my conclusion slide here, I hope I'm not too far over time. Chris hasn't given me one of these yet. So yeah, the Cape's water is in really bad shape. Wastewater is the main source. I think, in my opinion, no one management approach is the answer. Some people will tell you just got to sewer everything. It's the only way to go. I really think we need every tool in the toolbox because, you can't sewer the entire Cape. You can't put septic systems absolutely everywhere on the Cape. Not everybody's going to want to use a urine diverting or composting toilet. So I really think, we need all those different approaches that I mentioned to, get close to solving this problem. Sewers are currently the most accepted approach. When I'm looking at what towns are planning to do to solve these problems, it seems like that's sort of the go-to from a municipal perspective. But I do see, in my day-to-day work that IA septic and eco-sanitation systems are gaining a lot of interest, and the systems themselves are developing and getting better. So yeah, that's what I've got. That's my contact info. Feel free to reach out. Thanks for having me.
Next up, I'd like to introduce Kim Comart. There is no one I know that has worked harder at saving the ponds in their own hometown than Kim.
So as Chris noted, in mid-2022, a group of freshwater pond neighbors launched the Falmouth Pond Coalition to focus on protecting and preserving our 75+ freshwater ponds through education, organizing, partnership, and advocacy. Our work in the Falmouth Pond Coalition has shown us how connected the health of our freshwater ponds, and for that matter, all the waters in Falmouth and on the Cape, saltwater ponds, rivers, and bays, how connected the health is to our towns and our individual homeowners' wastewater management practices. We cannot preserve the health of our ponds if we don't manage our wastewater in an environmentally friendly manner and sensitive manner. From the moment I started my work, I was struck by the difference in how Falmouth, probably like Sandwich and other towns on the Cape, manage our solid waste and how we manage our wastewater. Falmouth's approach to solid waste management, probably like Sandwich's, is what I'll call prevention oriented and cost effective and environmentally friendly. We separate our recyclables from our trash. We have two bins, right? Blue in Falmouth, it's the blue bin, and the green bin, and we separate them before we put them down into the waste stream. So it's prevention oriented. It's focused on the inputs before we put it into the solid waste stream. So that makes sense financially, and it makes sense environmentally. So you don't have to try to separate your trash from your recyclables. So what do we do with wastewater? With wastewater, we do exactly the opposite. We take our gray water and mix it with the black water, and we put it down the same pipe into our sewer or our septic system. We flush it down the same drain, and then we're spending tens of millions of dollars at a sewage treatment plant trying to purify what I call a toxic concoction. And then we discharge what's still contaminated water into containment beds near the water treatment plant, wastewater treatment plant. And that water, at least in Falmouth, is leaching into our estuaries and polluting them. And if you're not on sewer, then you're putting this toxic concoction into your septic tank. And that is leaching into the groundwater and doing damage. So that really got me thinking about this whole issue of urine diversion and eco toilets. And I have to pay homage here to Hilda and Earl from the Green Center, because they are the hardest working people at this and have been incredibly inspiring for me. And I've just learned a lot from them. But it really, spending time with them, and I have to say, every scientist and water expert that I talk with, and I spent many, many hours when I was working on forming a pond group on my pond, and then the Pond Coalition, asking people, well, okay, there's fertilizer, there's stormwater runoff, there's septics, like, what's the most important thing we can do and work on? And everyone said that urine, like Bryan has said and Chris has said, is the primary reason our waters are overloaded with nutrients, and why we're experiencing pond eutrophication, the sort of suffocation of our ponds, cyanobacteria blooms, explosive algae and weed growth, stuff you've heard talked about already here. And then, of course, climate change is exacerbating all this, making the waters warmer and making the problem worse. As Bryan, has described, there are new generations of innovative alternative septic systems that are beginning to show some success in preventing significant levels of nitrogen from entering our waters. That said, depending on the particular property, as you heard, these could cost tens of thousands of dollars. They're still in the experimental stage, and they require several $1,000s of annual maintenance and monitoring costs. And beyond the financial cost, every time we flush urine down the toilet into our septic or sewer, we're discarding nitrogen and phosphorus. These are incredibly valuable nutrients that can be used as fertilizer. And instead of flushing them down the drain, we'd spend a fraction of the cost, probably around 20%, to purchase and install eco toilets or urinals that divert and capture the urine so it can be recycled. Toilets like the Wostman Eco Flush or a dry Wostman that doesn't use water direct the urine. And if you see the toilet back there, you see it's got 2 compartments, and you sit on it, and your feces goes where it goes now. It goes into your septic tank or the sewer, and the front compartment, the urine for men and women, goes down into a tank, either in your basement or you can put a tank in your yard. There's a sensor on it that signals to a septic hauler to come get it when it's getting filled up. That you can have an overflow from your septic tank, from your urine tank into your septic tank, in case you're worried about the overflow. And then it can be emptied, brought to a urine depot where it can be pasteurized or just sit for a long time. And then it can be given or sold to farmers, used by golf courses, and it can be used as fertilizer. I've got a book called Liquid Gold. That's what urine is. It's liquid gold, right? People pay for it. In Vermont, farmers are paying 40 cents a gallon for urine. It's really valuable fertilizer. The study that's being designed in Falmouth, that's been alluded to, is designed to assess the effectiveness of urine diversion in keeping nitrogen and phosphorus out of our groundwater, where it pollutes our ponds and makes its way. All the water that goes into our septic tanks in Falmouth and goes into the groundwater is either going to go to Buzzards Bay or it's going to go to Vineyard Sound. It's going to go to one of those 2 places. So it's traveling there. And the study that we're hoping to undertake is going to be conducted by MASSTC. And the current plan is for between 60 and 75 households to divert their urine away from their septic systems for at least 3 years, during which time sampling will take place to determine the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus that's being captured through urine diversion. There are a lot of decisions that remain to be made. Bryan is very familiar with this. Whether participants are going to have to replace all their toilets. Do you have to replace all your toilets, or perhaps disable your non-urine diversion toilets? That's a big question, a big issue. And another one is what level of financial subsidy. So if you want to participate in this project, what kind of financial subsidy are you going to get to support the installation of your toilets and the collection tanks? Will residents from towns like Sandwich, Mashpee, Barnstable, Bourne, etc., be able to participate? And if so, how will your participation, if you're in Sandwich, how will that be funded? Falmouth, the town of Falmouth government is not going to fund the participation of people from Sandwich. So it would mean that you either have to pay your own way, or your town has to come up with some money to subsidize your cost. And that's for your subsidy, it's for the retrieval and testing of the urine, and it is for the general overhead costs for the project. So those are discussions that need to happen and decisions need to be made. What fixtures are going to be allowed to be used during the study? Which, urinals, which toilets? Will an incinerating toilet? There's an incinerating toilet. We assume, we're hoping composting toilets should be permitted. But that toilet right there is not licensed by the Massachusetts State Plumbing Board. I am not legally allowed to install that toilet and use that toilet in my house. That's why it's here, for show and tell, right? And I know, and Melissa O'Dell right here, she's anxious to get one, but we're not legally permitted to do it. So part of what MASSTC is going to be helping with is trying to get approvals by the State Plumbing Board for people to be able to install these homes during this pilot or what's called a provisional study. So these are among the questions and issues that have to be resolved over the next few months with Bryan and his colleagues at MASSTC are driving this planning process. Our hope is that the study will be approved by the town meeting members in Falmouth in November at our fall town meeting. We'll see if that can happen. We're pushing hard. We're excited. Falmouth Pond Coalition is excited about this pioneering study. We know a lot of work has to be done to get these questions answered, decisions made, and then to use the data to influence government policy and homeowners' choices about how to manage human waste. It's not going to be easy, but then again, who would have thought 20, 30, 40 years ago that we would be recycling like automatically, right? We're recycling, and that, old habits sort of die hard, but most of us are pretty conscientious about recycling, and that wasn't happening a couple of decades ago. So just as we've done with recycling, I really believe that we can adjust our toileting habits. It's not a big change. We can reduce our expenses dramatically, and we can protect our ponds. We can recycle these valuable nutrients. So it's not complicated. It's really not complicated. That technology there is very, very simple. It doesn't have a lot of moving parts. And it just takes just a little change in your toileting habits, and there's really nothing to it. I just want to show some quick slides. So Chris Neal is a very respected scientist in Falmouth, works at the Woodwell Climate Research Center, and he just thinks it's crazy that we've let our waters deteriorate to this point. These are just a few pictures of some ponds in Falmouth that are really in very bad shape. That's a drone photo last summer. This is Mill Pond, Falmouth. I actually drove by there last night. So it's May. It looks like this in May. I drove by last night on my way back from getting ice cream. Here's Mill Pond in this last summer. And a Shumat Pond, which is one of the biggest ponds in Falmouth. It borders Mashpee. It's half Mashpee, half Falmouth. It's a very large pond. I think it's like 175 acres. This pond, I took this picture last September, and these pictures, and the entire pond looked like this. And it was closed to swimming, fishing for 2.5 months. So that's, so how did we get here? We've talked about this. We got here through nutrient overload, primarily nitrogen and phosphorus, primarily from septic systems. That is the major culprit, is the effluent from the septics going into the groundwater, going into our ponds, our rivers, our bays. And then fertilizer, we talk about that generally as being sort of 10% of the problem. People could stop using fertilizers, inorganic or organic, same thing. It's nutrients. Erosion and stormwater runoff. I consider this very actually low-hanging fruit. Just dealing with stormwater runoff shouldn't be a problem. Getting our, we have 4,000 storm drains in Falmouth, and there should be a truck going around all the time, emptying those out. Just never stopping, just emptying those out. It's not complicated, because the ones that are the most problematic are full of sediment. So it rains, they overflow, and then many of them flow right into our waters. And then waterfowl, pets are about 5% of the problem. Although in some ways they're ingesting the plants and then pooping it out. So it's like going through their body, right? Okay, and then again, this is just what we talked about. The phosphorus is a huge issue for us on the freshwater ponds. Urine is the major source, and there are a lot of different toilets and urinals that can be used. I will say that I think one of the biggest problems we've got is that there is no major American toilet manufacturer, Kohler, Toto, American Standard. None of them are making urine diversion toilets. These are European. Except the Cinderella, I think, is Norway. So they're all European. So we have this issue that unless and until American manufacturers start making these appliances, it's harder to develop a market here in the United States of people who are going to buy these. And it's hard to develop a market unless they're making them. And it's hard to get these manufacturers to make them if there's not a market. So we have this sort of catch-22 issue. And so we've got to start this like rolling, where people in the United States are starting to use these and the American manufacturers start thinking there's a market. There's a market and they can make some money. This is a tank that I would buy if I could install that in my basement. I mean, if I can install that toilet, this is similar to a tank I probably have in my basement. It's very simple. And for those of you who don't know, the Rich Earth Institute up in Vermont, this is sort of this, their focus is how to use urine as a beneficial, for beneficial use as fertilizer. I went up there August 15th with Chris and Jeff and about 10 other people, spent the day there, and it was, really inspiring. So they have a program up there and they're retrieving urine from people's homes. So, a lot of houses are heated with oil, right? You have a truck come and hook the hose up and put oil into your tank. This just does the opposite. It just pumps out the urine into the truck and they take it away. And they process it and use it for fertilizer. So that's it. And I'm glad to take any questions. Yeah.
How are they collecting urine?
How is Rich Earth collecting it?
Yes.
Oh, so there are a lot of homeowners, an increasing number of homeowners there who have urine diversion toilets in their house. We visited 5 of them and a public library. Yeah, like the Wostman Echo Flush actually was the main one we saw, and there was a Wostman dry toilet. Vermont allows it. Vermont is much less strict about these approvals. Massachusetts is not approved the Wostman. There are people who are installing Wostman toilets below the radar without getting permission. That is happening on Cape Cod, and it's happening in other places around the country. But if you want to be legal about it, and I'm trying to be legal about it, then you've got to get a permit. The other thing that's happening in Vermont is that there are hundreds of people in and around Brattleboro who are using cubies and bringing cubies to central locations where the cubies get pumped out. So they retrieve urine from people's homes. And we went to a library in Westminster, Vermont. The only toilet they have is a Wostman Echo Flush toilet. And everyone uses it and it's fine. We went to people's homes and people were really happy with it. And there were dry ones and there were water ones, flush ones. I paid about $680, and that included the shipping costs from Sweden. That include the shipping costs. If if a bunch of people were interested in getting Wostmans, like I've had conversations with the folks in Sweden recently. If we wanted 50 Wostman toilets on Cape Cod, we would get a very significant discount. We'd probably get at least a 30% discount. And they, you know, they'd be glad to do that. So, yep. Anyway, any other questions? Okay.
Okay, just one last quick announcement, the Green Center, Hilda, if you just want to raise your hand. Hilda and Earl actually live the eco sanitation life. They have a wonderful urine diverting and composting toilet that works wonderfully right in their home in Falmouth. And they really enjoy giving people a tour of their home and how this works. So they are having a tour on Saturday, June 1st from 1:30 to 3:30. And if you're interested, her email is in the links page, or I'm sure she wouldn't mind if you approached her here at the end of the meeting. But we're going to wrap it up. If you didn't get a chance to look at the Wostman toilet in the back of the room, I really suggest that before you go, take a quick look at it before we have to pack it up. And any other questions you have, of course, email me and I can get you in touch with the right people if I can't answer your questions. Okay, thank you all for coming.